Welcome to our webinar titled Carefree, Finding Respite. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lee Clark, Director of Patient Services, and I'll be moderating the presentation today. As we get started, I'd like to recognize the generous support of our corporate sponsors and the generous support of our patients, families, and caregivers for supporting the program today. It is possible that you may lose your connection during the program. If you're unable to view the program online, you can call in to hear the audio portion using the call-in number in your reminder email. Today's program will be archived to our website within several business days. You will be notified by email when it is live and ready for viewing. Throughout the presentation, there will be a few questions that our presenter will be asking. So we'd like to keep this as an interactive webinar. Please feel free to submit your answers, to the questions using the Q&A window in the lower part of your screen. You also will use the Q&A window to submit your questions at any time during the presentation. When you finish typing, just hit enter, and we'll also make sure that we get to everyone's questions today. When you are asking questions, I would like for you to do two things to help me manage the incoming questions. First, please submit your question all at the same time. Second, please do not share private health information in your question. Our speaker cannot answer any specific questions related to your personal health care. Our presenter today is Jane Hamilton. Jane is a registered nurse. She's an educator and an author. As a nurse, she's had over 40 years experience, and as a family caregiver of 20 years experience. Jane is nationally known for being a caregiver advocate and speaker. Her original evidence-based model of self-care for caregivers can be found in her book, The Caregiver's Guide to Self-Care. Jane also operates two websites, one for professionals and one for family caregivers, to be able to provide some guidance and some tips and support for those providing care to those that we love. With all of that said, it's my incredible pleasure to welcome Jane. Thanks so much, Jane. We're delighted you're able to join us again.
Well, thank you very much, Lee, for that wonderful introduction. And I welcome all of you who are listening in today to the webinar. And as Lee mentioned, we're going to try to make this interactive. It's always much more enjoyable when we can have a conversation, but because we're not in the same room, we're limited to having electronic ways of communicating. So please contribute to the chat, and Lee is going to follow those and share those answers with me as we go through our session today called Carefree, Finding Respite. Now, when the foundation asked me to do a presentation and we started to talk about my addressing caregivers, I know personally, and you know firsthand, that caregiving is anything but carefree. But we chose this offbeat title to think about and encourage you to think about finding times in your lives as caregivers when you can be free of the things, of the cares that are your responsibility. Free up so that you can feel a little bit lighter and let some of the stress go and allow your body to relax and to go the distance in the caregiving experience. So we're going to talk today about how to find moments that are light, that release your care, and that allow you a moment of respite on your caregiving journey. So to get started, and we're going to start with some of the interaction. So I'd like to ask you to tell me, who are you caring for? And I don't want names, but is this your spouse, your child, your parent, your grandparent, your uncle, your friend? Who are you caring for? And how long have you been at this caregiving role? So if you could find the chat function and just type in a few the bits of information, we'll get a sense of who's here with us today on the webinar. And Lee, as you see those come in, you just jump in and tell me
Sure.
what you're finding. And what I'm going to do now is I am going to move into sharing with you some of the slides that we're going to use as we go through this webinar. And beyond having it be called Carefree, let's talk about what our agenda is going to be. We're going to talk about your need for respite and discuss actually what is respite, what forms does it take, what are the signs that you need respite as a caregiver, and why is this of importance to you? Why did the people at the foundation say, yes, let's talk about this today? Then we're going to have the second half focus on finding respite. Why are we sometimes not getting the breaks that we need? And then we'll spend some time looking at how can you actually make some provisions for your own self and not just for those who are in your care. Any thoughts yet, Lee, in terms of who's a care receiver?
So Jane, we have 3 spouses, a brother, and 1 person identified as a friend.
Okay, good. Okay, and any sense of time, how long people have been caregiving?
1 said 12 years plus. The other says 4 years. So those were the 2
Okay, so
that gave a time frame.
Okay, so this is not something that just happens overnight and then it's gone. We're looking at a long journey, and we're going to talk about that today. So why actually did the foundation choose this as our topic for the caregiver webinar? Well, studies show that 60% of caregivers report a moderate to significant decline in their own health. And so we're concerned not only of the health of the care receiver, but of the caregiver. And there are consequences that researchers have identified over the years. Caregiving leads to chronic stress. The average length of time that all caregivers, regardless of what the diagnosis or situation is, the average length of time for caregiving is 4.5 years, and a third of caregivers who have been studied provide care for more than 5 years. So just the couple of folks who shared the time with us indicate that this group here on this call are long-term caregivers who are dealing with chronic stress. So chronic stress erodes our immune system. It gives a higher risk of having minor minor illnesses or difficulties. Things as simple as more colds or getting the flu, but things like muscle aches and headaches and backaches and GI problems. Risks for those minor things are more common for caregivers, but also for more significant illnesses. What we know is that that older adults are at risks of falls with caregiving. Studies have shown that that caregivers are twice as likely as the general population of non-caregivers to have significant health conditions. Things associated with long-term caregiving are cardiac disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune diseases have been linked to long-term stress of caregiving. And one study showed that caregiving can take as many as 10 years off a person's life. We also know that, no, did I move to emotional? I'm sorry, I moved to the wrong slide. The physical consequences are what I want to talk about here right now, but the sleep disturbances are often unrecognized, but you might find in your own experience that your care receiver needs some care that disturbs your sleep at night. And when sleep is disturbed, it has an undermining effect on a person's health. We know also that people who are caregivers are subject to weight change. The stress of long-term caregiving responsibilities can increase the cortisol level in our bodies. And as a result, insulin resistance can lead to weight gain. There are other caregivers who have tremendous anxiety and lose their appetite, and they can lose weight also. So the physical consequences are significant, and it is another thing of interest, which I have discovered, is that the health differences are more pronounced in younger millennial group caregivers than they are in those of Gen X or the baby boomers. So age has an impact. But caregiving doesn't only impact on us in a physical way, it affects our emotions. And so when we look at people who are caregivers, we know that 40 to 70% report some kind of mild to severe depression. Caregivers use prescription medication at 2 to 3 times the rate of the general population. These are medications to deal with mood and anxiety. 21% of caregivers report a sense of loneliness, and that isolation and can lead to a sense of negativity. That sense of loneliness 72% of those who report loneliness report a high degree of emotional stress. So being lonely increases our sense of stress, and it is both symptomatic of caregiver distress, and it increases the distress that we experience. A third of caregivers report severe anxiety, and there is something that is called caregiver burden. There is there are tools that researchers have developed to allow caregivers to check to see if my health is at risk as a result of caregiving. And so I have provided a caregiver burden self-assessment tool, a questionnaire that you can take to check in on actually how your health is being affected by caregiving. The foundation is going to post this tool on their website. And so following the webinar, you can go there and find the tool and check out your own score to see if you are at risk. If you are at risk, it's really a significant thing for you to think about protecting your own health and your well-being. But to protect against the negative effects of caregiving, we recommend respite, and that's why we have chosen this topic. So before we move to the next slide, I want you to tell me, what are your thoughts about what words come into your mind when you hear respite? What do you think of? What would respite mean to you? Let's take a moment with that and type it in. Are you getting anything, Lee?
Not yet, but keep going, and as things come in, Jane, I'll
Okay.
wait for a moment. Yep, and we can move on to that.
Sounds good. So my answer to what respite is based on what people in psychology have identified as anything that gives me a break or a breather, something that gives me some time out, some time away from responsibilities. It is anything that is a temporary break, or that gives me some sense of relaxation and rest. Now, respite can come in many different forms. It can be as very different time frames. It can be anything from a quick phone call that's going to lift my spirits that will only last a few minutes. It can range from a couple of hours of help to a couple of months, depending on my need and the unique situation. Respite can also vary in terms of who provides it. I can get respite and help from people who are my friends, my family, my neighbors, people in my faith community who know me personally. But I can also turn to people who are not personal friends, but who are professionals in a home health organization, for example, or in a nonprofit organization like the get this out, Jane. The area agencies on aging provide respite, and the Veterans Administration, as an association and an organization, provides respite to veterans. So providers can span a whole host of different individuals and organizations. Respite can also vary in terms of the services that are provided. It can be something very simple like bringing a meal, or coming in and helping and providing a little bit of light housekeeping. It can be non-skilled care like helping people dress, or grooming them, or helping them to just walk, or spending some time socializing. That's not technically very difficult, but sometimes the services can be complex medical healthcare services that a nurse or a therapist might provide, and allow the caregiver to step back and not provide that care. So services vary. The location of respite can also vary. It can be provided right in my home. Somebody can come and do some housekeeping or socializing with the care receiver. It can be provided in a community-based partial day program, for example, or in an assisted living site, or it can be residential, where somebody could go to a healthcare facility for a few days, a nursing home, for example, for a few days, so that a caregiver could take a whole vacation and know that their loved one is cared for. So the services and the locations vary in complexity, and consequently, the costs do as well. It can range from costing nothing to have some family and friends and neighbors come by for help, but it can actually become quite costly if someone is providing or paying for it out of pocket. Sometimes respite care can be subsidized by, for example, the Veterans Administration. So it really varies. And so when you think about respite for yourself as a caregiver, think broadly. Recognize that it is not a very simple, simplistic thing, and it can be tailored to meet your needs and the needs of the person who is in your care. So here's my next question for you to think
Jane,
about. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We had a few responses to your other question. So respite means away from person cared for. And then one person said refueling myself.
Exactly.
Yes. A time out. So I can rest myself, so I can provide the best care for my loved one.
Exactly. Yeah, that is a perfect summary of what is respite. That time out, time away, so I can provide good care and I can stay well. So here's my next question for you, and I want you to think about this. What are the signs that you need respite? What are the warning signals that say, whoa, you need a break here? They will, what I will tell you is they will show up in any of the parts of your life that are listed here. You can have physical symptoms that say, oh, my back is hurting me. Or emotional symptoms like I'm crying all the time, or I'm losing it emotionally. Behaviorally, I just can't do, um, uh, can't manage myself, and I'm acting out perhaps. Mentally, I can't focus. I can't remember things. Interpersonally, I just don't want to be with anybody anymore. I just want to be alone, or I get into arguments with people perhaps because I'm so upset and exhausted that I can't manage my energy in my relationships. So energy, this exhaustion, is oftentimes a real clanging bell that's telling me I need respite. My focus on my work can be lost. I can forget to do things. Or the flip side of it is the only thing I can think about is the work that I have to do, and all the other aspects of my life are lost. And another sign that I need respite is that the quality of care that I am providing can fall off. When I'm burned out, I don't have the good energy, and so sometimes my care can suffer. So my question is, for you, can you identify some signs, share with us some signs that you see that you need a break? And while you're putting those in, I want to move to the next slide, and we'll come back to the answers to this in a moment, Lee. But what I want to talk with you about and emphasize is really, why is this such an important topic? First of all, respite is important because it is an investment in your own good health and well-being. And nobody, least of all your care receiver, wants your health to suffer. It's very critical that you protect your health and well-being, not only for your own health, but also for you to be able to continue to care. So respite is a form of self-care. Self-care is essentially showing concern for my own needs, being present to the feelings that I have within me and responding to them, having regard for myself and respect for myself by showing that I will care for me as well as others, looking out for myself, making provisions for my own needs, for me too, not just for those of others. And respite is also important because it builds my resilience. Now, what is resilience? It is essentially that spark of life that gives us the strength and the stamina to keep going when we encounter adversity. It is an approach to dealing with challenges that is successful coping. It's not destructive to myself, but it is making choices that will build my health and help my energy to continue on. Respite is my ability to bounce back when I encounter a stressful or adverse situation. And sometimes when I am resilient, I can even grow from the challenges that I encounter. So respite is a form of self-care that builds our resilience. It protects our health. It helps us to handle the challenges and adversity that we encounter. And it allows us to provide good care to the person who we love. So Lee, what were some of the signs of, gee, I need respite that people talked about?
We have lack of patience. One is feeling emotionally exhausted. Small things get on your nerves.
Yep.
And losing my feeling of self.
Yes. That when I become so consumed with providing care to somebody else, I can lose myself. So say those again. Losing myself, small things trigger me off.
get on my nerves,
get on my,
lack of patience, feeling emotionally exhausted.
right. Okay, so what I want to talk about is, so all of those things are warning signals, and it's important for us when those stressors or when the stress of caregiving brings forth those warning signals that we respond. But sometimes we don't respond, even though we know we should. So I want to talk a moment about even though we do know it's important, sometimes we don't. Why is that? What are the barriers that get in the way? And think about these and see if these don't resonate with you. One of the reasons why we sometimes don't carve out the time to take care of ourselves is because of the roles that we have. The roles that we have within our families. I'm the oldest daughter. I'm the strong one. I'm the one who takes care of everybody. Or sometimes we have traditional roles, sex roles. This is the way women act. These are the things women do. These are the things men do. Or we have religious roles. If I'm a good person of faith, I am patient, I am kind, I am giving, I am selfless. And sometimes those religious-based or faith-based roles lead us to say, I really need to just keep going with this. And if I take care of myself and don't do the things that the other person needs, maybe I'm letting them down. I'm not doing what I should be doing. So I feel guilty about it. Or another reason beyond our roles that we sometimes feel we don't have the time, or that we shouldn't take care of ourselves and get some respite, is that we overlook the threat of not taking care of ourselves. Oh, I'm strong, I'm young, I'm healthy. He's the one who's really sick, and I've got a lot of energy. So I can bear up underneath this. So I overlook. I look at my strength, or I overlook the fact that this has been going on for 4.5 or 10 years, and that nobody who lives with chronic stress has the ability to skate away unscathed. But we forget that. It becomes just, this is what I'm doing. And I have a photograph or a picture here of the ship headed towards the iceberg. This is supposed to be the Titanic going to the iceberg. And, they didn't see the iceberg and they ran right into it. And and I know what happened to the Titanic. And so we need to recognize that there are icebergs out there in the water. And as we're sailing along on the caregiving journey, some of those icebergs can get us if we're not watchful and careful and responsive to our own needs. And I think the third barrier to getting respite, to finding respite for me, is that I diminish the importance of small acts of self-care. Respite doesn't have to be a month at the shore. Respite doesn't mean that doesn't have to be hiring somebody to take over and do all the work. Respite can be a phone call with a friend, going out for lunch with your whoever is a significant person, taking regular walks, those things that we do, small things to take care of ourselves. Those small acts of self-care add up. And we diminish them sometimes and thinking, well, taking a break, that's not going to do all that much for me. But in fact, the research shows that the effect of small acts of self-care are cumulative, and they do have a protective effect on our lives. So let's talk about, how do we overcome these barriers? How do we get past the guilt or the diminishing or the denial or the minimizing the importance of it? And how do we actually move forward and make a way to get respite? So I have two thoughts that I'd like to present to you. And the first way of finding respite is really a mental approach. It's making a mental commitment to self-care. And you see on this picture some little children brushing their teeth. So what's a toothbrush doing on this slide? And that is designed to remind you. And so tonight, when you go and brush your teeth, remember this session. When we brush our teeth regularly every single day, and we use a little toothpaste and practice regular toothbrushing day in and day out, year in and year out, we have dental health. And we can live to be 60, 70, 80, 90 years old and still have teeth because of those little acts of regular self-care that have protected our oral health. Now, that may not be a beautiful image, but the fact is that's that small act that is sometimes just not a big thing, but cumulatively it brings well-being. And in the same way, committing to self-care for yourself is a way, the first step, I would say, to finding respite. And so my quick way to remember this is admit, permit, and commit to self-care. So admit that you have stressors in your life and that they take a toll on your physical and mental health, as we've just said. And admit that you have needs. Pay attention to those symptoms, to those clanging alarm bells that are physical, emotional, interpersonal, energy related that we talked about. Recognize those. See them for what they are, as your body warning you and eagerly asking you to protect itself. So admit that you need self-care as a way to give yourself respite. Then permit is the second piece of this. Labeling self-care as not selfish. Relabel it and say self-care, anything I do to care for myself, will give me a break. It can be a small respite break. And these things are things that will, that are essentially health promotion strategies. So if you find yourself feeling guilty about self-care, give yourself permission by saying this is a health promotion strategy. And I have very clearly found that those things do add up to a little bit less tension, a little bit more relaxation, and a little bit more energy to keep going and doing a good job. So permit is the second piece of finding respite by committing to self-care. And finally, commit is the third element of this. Making a time, and it is, this piece of it is choosing. So admitting is recognizing, permitting is giving permission, and committing is choosing to follow through on those little things that all add up. Recognizing that when you commit to and follow through on strategies that are caring for you, when you put yourself on your own to-do list, that refills the energy that you have spent on caring for others. And none of us are machines that plug into the socket on the wall and to get energy from the electric power grid. Our energy comes from within us, and our energy is restored by acts of rest and self-care. So remember, you're not a caregiving machine. Admit that you have needs. Figure out what would be good for you. Give yourself permission. It's a health promotion strategy, and then act on it. Choose to care for yourself as you care for others. And the second step I would suggest in finding respite is really very particular to finding the help that you need. The first set of suggestions focused on taking care of yourself, and these suggestions will focus on finding the help that you need. Again, these comments that I'm going to present, these 6 suggestions, are spelled out in a document that will be available to you from the Foundation's website. So the practical action steps are, first of all, to clarify what it is you need and be specific. Do you need 3 hours off on Friday afternoon so that you can go to the doctor for yourself? Or do you need somebody to come in on Saturday evening so that you can have dinner and go out with somebody else and relax? What do you need? That's clarifying your needs is one of them. And along with it is to claim that you have a right to have needs. It's not just the patient, it's not just the one who is ill. You have needs, and you have a right to ask and to put yourself on the priority list along with others. The second suggestion in terms of finding respite is, beyond clarifying your own needs, to assess the needs of your care receiver, the one in your care. And again, like being specific about your needs, be specific about what they need. Do they need meals? Do they need laundry? Do they need light housekeeping? Do they need personal care, a daily walk, medical help? What does that person need? And it would be a good idea to list all of the needs, large or small, just so that you have them in front of you. And along with assessing your caregiver in terms of what he or she needs, is identifying their level of disability and the level of care that they need. Some of our care receivers are fairly self-managing and they don't need a high level of care. Others need much more care, and it will be important to determine the level of care so that you are focused on respite providers who will be capable of safely and effectively meeting the needs of the care receiver. The third idea in terms of finding respite is to coordinate with your family members. This is sort of your first line of assistance. Family members don't generally cost money, so they're invested personally, emotionally with the care receiver. Now, sometimes family members are difficult in terms of getting them to work with you, and I've been down that road. And so sometimes family dynamics make coordinating with family members a difficult thing. But if you do have the possibility of connecting with family, list some options so that you can think about connecting up the individuals and their skill set and their relationship with the care receiver and their interests with the particular needs that are that you want met, and list options so that they can choose. Also, when you're recruiting family members, answer their questions. They may be afraid. You may be so used to providing the care and they don't know what to do, and they may be nervous, or they may be concerned that they would make a mistake. So demonstrating what to do if that is an appropriate kind of thing. Um, Again, recognizing that they will have questions, and if you're seeking their help, for you to sort of give them some time to get those answers will help engage them in the process. And the another thing in terms of families is to consider using a free scheduling app or an online tool. There are several of them, and this will be on the downloadable document that you can get from the website. One is called Lots of Helping Hands. Another one is called Care Calendar, and another one is called IANA Care. IANA, which IANA stands for I Am Never Alone Care. And that's an app. So there are all kinds of ways to coordinate families that may be helpful to you in finding respite. So 3 more ideas to beyond family to explore respite options. Who can pitch in? It would be a good idea to cast a wide net, I guess, would be the way to say it. Beyond family who are near, maybe some folks are out of town, but could be brought in or could come in for a visit or could phone in for social connection. Sometimes there are volunteer organizations, people in your faith community, or people who could be paid. There are many different options. And, longtime friends. There is the Arch National Respite Network and Resource Center, the National Adult Day Services Association, the Department of Veterans Affairs. All 3 of those are large organizations that provide respite. And those references will be on the material that you can find following the webinar. But think broadly and think creatively to find help so that you don't go to the same people all the time. The 5th suggestion that I have is to make sure that you ensure the quality of the respite care provider. You are turning over the care of your loved one to another individual and to an organization. So think in terms of a job interview. That's essentially what you're doing. Do not assume that people are qualified, whether they're voluntary or paid, whether they're an agency or an individual care provider. You need to check their qualifications. In terms of agencies, ask the proper questions about them. Their licensure, are they an agency or registry? And that tells you something about how they work with people who they hire, the liability issues, who can you contact if you have some questions. It's many different questions, and these are, again, on the downloadable material. And if you're asking an individual caregiver, again, think job description. Ask if you're hiring somebody, ask about their training, about their caregiving experience, about their experiences in the past with respite care, and ask about their availability and their interest in this. You don't want to get started with somebody and then they say, well, I'm going away for 2 weeks and so I really can't help you. So think job interview when you're seeking to form a relationship with a respite care provider. And finally, if you are in a position of wanting financial help, seek that. Costs vary with respect to paid respite care. There are several federal and state programs that are available, and they offer a variety of help with fees. The VA has actually got a free respite program for veterans. Think about long-term care insurance. That may cover some cost. And again, in your if your care receiver is over 65, the federal group of area agencies on aging may help you to find some financial assistance if you need it for respite care. So check the material to get this specific information if you want some more. And I'm going to now bring us to a close and ask you to do one last thing. I want you to think about your own life and some on a little piece of paper somewhere, say, what is one thing I will do, one step I will take to find respite? When will I do this? And think for yourself about why it's important. I'm going to give us about a minute here to give you to just think about one thing you'll do, and chat. Put this in the chat box if you have an example of a way to find respite that you've thought about that you could do as a result of this webinar.
Thanks so much, Jane. While we're waiting for that, we have a couple of questions. Would you like to go ahead and do that? And then we can.
Absolutely. Yes, that would be perfect.
So the question is, does including the patient in the decision for the caregiver to seek respite help with the feeling of guilt?
Well, I think that is probably an individual thing, but I would think that yes, it would, because if I can have an authentic, a real conversation with the care receiver and say, I love you, I care for you, I'm doing the very best I can, and this is challenging for me. I'm recognizing that I need time to care for my own physical and mental health, and taking a break would be good for me, and it would allow me to come back refreshed and better able to be with you in this caregiving situation. My sense, Lee, is that being honest with somebody, being respectful of myself as well as the care receiver, and explaining this is why this is important would help. Now, the care receiver might be upset about it, might feel threatened by it, or afraid of who else will come in. So they may not respond reasonably and say, oh, I understand, darling, you can go and do that. You know, they may have a cranky response. So then my question is, where's the guilt there? Maybe that's the piece where I have to go back to admit and permit and commit, admitting that this really is affecting my health, permitting myself to say, this is not selfish. I don't have to feel guilty about being selfish. And committing by making a choice. I am going to choose this, even though my care receiver may not be real happy about it. That's a long answer.
Yeah, no, a good answer. Thank you so much. So we have a response. So what is one step I'll take? Assist my siblings help take care of our mom while I'll do this, because I'm tired of doing it all alone.
Yes. And, you know, in terms of engaging your siblings, having a family meeting, a Zoom call, for example, or getting together if you all happen to be in the same place, to talk about some of the things we've discussed today, why respite is important and why you're asking them to help. And the handout that you can get from the website will give you some ideas about approaching that with your family members. But the admit, permit, and commit comes in here really as a key variable, that calling that family meeting together and saying in a very matter of fact, not in an attacking or nasty, and when you're exhausted, it's easy to be really furious with people for not helping out enough. But to the extent that you can manage your emotions and saying, this is something I need, it will help you in that family meeting. Sometimes families have a lot of really heavy duty conflict. People don't talk with each other, or people act in nasty ways to one another. So, you know, if you feel the need, you could find an outside facilitator to help you facilitate that discussion. Do you know somebody who is a counselor or somebody who is a clergy person who could help you facilitate objectively, sort of be the facilitator of the discussion? That happens sometimes. And another thought that I have about this, getting the family to help, it's the image of going to an empty pitcher. So if I want some milk and I go to the milk pitcher and there's nothing in it, I'm not going to get anything from the milk pitcher. So I might just as well go out to the grocery store and buy a new half-gallon of milk. And sometimes in the caregiving experience, there are members of our families who are empty pitchers, and we get nothing from them. And one of the things that I experienced in my own caregiving was I had to accept that one of the people in my family was not going to be there to help. And it was a hard thing to come to terms with, but I recaptured some of my energy when I stopped trying to make that person do what that person either could not or would not do. So some things we have are beyond our control, and so letting things go is another element to figuring out how to get the family involved.
Thanks, Jane. This question is about getting others involved when they don't live local. So this is more of a long distance caregiving question. How can you go about getting people involved that want to help, but maybe don't live in the area?
Well, when my parents were not well, they were 1,000 miles away from me. And I visited as often as I could. And when I came in, I supported the person who was the caregiver on an ongoing basis. So I cared for them. And I did what I could to help handle the situations with my parents. So the long distance person can sometimes come in and give a spell or a respite to the on the scene caregiver. Sometimes the long distance person can be brought in on a regular basis for telephoning, for social and emotional support to the one who is not well. Sometimes the long distance person can help handle finances or taxes or insurance issues that you don't have to be in the room to do. It depends on what the skill set is for the long distance individual and the set of needs that the care receiver has and also the local caregiver has. Start to think about the local caregiver as the receiver of care in that situation. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
And we do have a question. This actually comes from a patient
Uh-huh.
that says, my spouse is a wonderful caregiver,
Mhm.
but does too much caregiving.
Mhm.
How can I, any suggestions on how to handle that? And any tips on how to start the conversation and get this person to take respite?
Mm, okay. Well, first of all, it strikes me, Lee, that that is an incredibly loving, aware question and concern that this person who is usually the care receiver has. So a beautiful thing. And speaking from that position of care, um, to have a frank and direct and gentle conversation. I love you. I appreciate all that you are doing. I see how this is affecting you, and I worry about you and your health. This person can perhaps cite some of the statistics that we heard today, that caregiving can take 10 years off of your life. Caregiving can drain your energy and lead to physical as well as emotional illnesses. Caregiving can undermine your ability to work effectively if you have an out of the house job. So for the person who is concerned about their overly committed or overly active caregiver, they may talk about perhaps the admit, permit, and commit process. Darling, you really do have to admit you're not sleeping well. You're complaining about headaches. These are and present the symptoms that you see, all done in a tone with a tone of love and concern. Then go back to the permit that self-care is not selfish, and you're taking care of yourself is not going to injure me. It's going to help us as a couple or as a pair to make our way through this in the healthiest possible way. And then ask that person to commit. Will you please put yourself on your to-do list today? And you can go back to them and say, so what's on your to-do list for yourself today? And just and remind them that little things add up. The toothbrushing thing, the little things you do to take care of yourself will protect your health and your well-being and your capacity to care.
Well, thank you so much, Jane, for sharing your time and your expertise on such an important topic for caregivers. And if you'd like to watch this webinar again at a later time, it will be available on our website within just a few business days. And just as a reminder, the tools that Jane spoke about during the presentation will also be added to the website. So you'll be able to have access to those as well. If you have any additional questions or anything else that you'd like to know about caregiving, you can send us an email to help@aamds.org, call our helpline at 800-747-2820, or submit your question to our Facebook page. On behalf of the Aplastic Anemia and MDS International Foundation, I'd like to thank you for joining us today, making us your resource of choice for information on bone marrow failure diseases. Our medical advisory board and team are always here to support and help you and your family, as we've done for the past 39 years. This concludes our program. Thank you so much, Jane.
Thank you.
Take care now. Bye-bye.